Good morning, everyone. Some people's coming in. Excellent. My name is Cindy Alvarez, and I spend most of my days trying to figure out the difference between what people say they want and what they actually want. And any of you who've ever built something that other humans use know that there's a big gap between those. Humans are weird and irrational, and we're not very good at predicting the things that we'll use. So we're going to talk a little bit about why that is and some hacks for getting around it. So first of all, everyone in this room owns a brain, and our brains play tricks on us. They do this every day. It's how we survived as a species. There's an awful lot that our brains do that we're not even aware of, and it helped prevent us from things like getting stomped by woolly mammoths, eating poisonous berries, doing dreadfully horrible things that cause us to get kicked out of our communities. We mostly don't do those things because our brains look for patterns, they simplify, and they look for normalcy even when it doesn't exist. People have said that at disaster scenes, when you see in the movies and there's a fire and everyone's running around screaming, "Ah!" that actually doesn't happen. People mostly die because they're irrationally calm and they don't actually go to the exits. They're like, "No, everything is fine. I can surely get my coat and my backpack and my, oops, I died of smoke inhalation." So this is our brain protecting us from the extreme discomfort of the risk that we might die in a fire, and it causes us sometimes to actually die in a fire. But mostly this has kept us alive. But this way of processing that our brain has is terrible when it comes to figuring out things that we want to make or build, building those things for other people, and having them actually be productive. These series of tricks called cognitive biases, they affect the way that we perceive the world, the way we remember information. It also means that we're crap at predicting the things that we're going to like, the things that we're going to use, the things that we're going to buy. Everyone in this room who is making or building, you probably have people that you would like to have using your stuff, contributing to your stuff, buying your stuff. And if you haven't built the right thing, you're going to end up with a lot of wasted time. Now, of course, if you're building something just for yourself, that's also fine. But you'll find that even when you're solving your own problem, these same things tend to kick in. We tend to predict that we'll want something or we'll do something or learn something, and then that doesn't actually happen. So what do we do about this? What do we do if we're working at a company and we get customers asking for features? And you might read them and think, these are ridiculous, they don't really need this. But this is the customer, they're paying you money. They're like, this is the deal here, we pay you money, you build this thing. Many of us have also built that exact thing that someone asked for, and then 6 months later had them still be unhappy. And yet we're still out there trying to support thousands of lines of code to do this thing that no one really wanted in the first place. Or we may have an idea for something we want to build. How do we validate that that's actually a good idea? It's very tempting to just jump in and start building something, and sometimes that is the fastest approach. But a lot of times what that tells us at the end is just that it's a very binary answer. People want this, they don't want it. We don't really know why, and that makes it harder to do better the next time. So what do? We can't ask people, what do you want? I mean, you've probably tried that, and it probably didn't work very well. I try it all the time, and it never works very well, which is the very definition of insanity, of doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. But there are things that you can do, and in their own weird ways, humans are predictable in that there are certain things you can ask us that will get us to tell you the truth even when we don't particularly want to. And those are a sort of meandering path of finding out, what are people doing today? The best predictor of what people will do tomorrow is what they're doing today. And I like to say that most people kind of have a plus or minus 5% on what they're doing right now. There's a very small percentage of people who have an epiphany, they're on their deathbed and they realize, oh my gosh, I'm unhealthy, I'm obese, I'm going to become a vegan, I'm going to become an ultra-marathoner. It's a very small percentage of people. The rest of us maybe say, I'll walk up the stairs today instead of taking the lift. That's the 5%. Now, people can keep evolving along a path, but if you're going to make a step function change, it's going to be that plus or minus 5%. So what are people actually doing today? Not the thing that they think they're going to do next week, not the thing that they aspirationally hope that they will do next month, today. You want to know what frustrates them, and this can be tricky, and I spend my day job working with developers. I help build tools for developers, And so in particular, when you have a lot of people who pride themselves on being problem solvers and being incredibly bright, they don't always want to admit when something frustrates them because they don't want to admit that it was a hard thing to do. And that's usually our fault. It's usually my fault. Someone that I work with's fault. But when you're trying to build software for people, they're not always clear on why things are frustrating. A lot of times they just say this sucks, and that's not particularly helpful. It is an input. So you want to find out exactly those things. And they're often very hard to articulate, or they even sound silly when we say them. Like, you know, when I pulled to refresh, it took just a beat too long. It's like, really, that sounds very petty. But that is the kind of thing that might get you to switch to a different app. We want to learn what people's constraints are. So people often think of this in terms of hard constraints like budget or time or technical ability. This is also often where that squishy, irrational human comes in, is that constraints are often social. Everyone I know is using this platform. Everyone in my family has these preferences. And those also are hard to get people to articulate. And you want to know what the decision-making factors that come into play. If you're building a tiny utility, it might be, hey, a developer can use this for themselves. They can make that decision in 5 minutes, download, start playing with it. That's a very simple one. If you're building something that might be used in a giant enterprise where you have to go to your boss and make a case for something to be used, that's a different decision-making process. If it's something that I can buy for myself and I don't particularly feel inclined to tell my husband about, that's a smaller decision-making process than like, hey, honey, I bought a new car, which is something where hopefully some discussion would come into play. So those are the angles. But what are the things preventing us from getting at those? The first thing is cognitive dissonance, and that's that incredibly uncomfortable feeling when you have two conflicting ideas in your head, and your head just doesn't really want to deal with the fight that's going on. And the classic thing I hear a lot of times is someone built a product, maybe did a redesign of a website, and suddenly people can't use it. Well, we worked hard on this website, we're really good designers and developers, but people can't use it. Maybe the people are stupid. And that's the path we really want to go to because it's very comfortable and it allows one side to win. Like, we're good. These people couldn't use it. Eliminate one side and it causes comfort. But obviously not the right kind of comfort because, people can no longer check out from your e-commerce site. It's not just that they're dumb, it's that you're going to lose revenue and be out of a job soon. And so what do we do about that? The first thing I like to say is just, as a person for yourself, working internally, it takes sort of a zen, like embrace the uncomfortable belief. And it's when you start feeling icky about something to actually stop and think there's a reason for this. Like, my brain is trying to protect me from thinking more deeply about this thing that's going to make me uncomfortable, but it's actually exactly that thing that I probably need to think more about. When you're talking to people outside of sort of, a trusted team, it's a little bit harder to say, like, look, we just have to accept that this is uncomfortable. I've never really had any success going to customers and say, like, revel in the discomfort. But then it can be helpful to kind of just assume that one side is true. So someone is clearly struggling with a little bit of cognitive dissonance. They don't kind of want to admit something and just say, like, look, assuming X is true, what do we do about it? I've actually had some success in arguing with people over climate change about this. Like, look, let's just assume that it's not man-made, but it keeps getting warmer. And they're like, maybe we should do something about this. And not that simple, but it helps get away from that sense of just warring factions within your head so you can actually stop and think about things. The other is to just keep digging. And in business school terms, this is known as like the 5 whys. If you just keep asking, well, why? Well, why? And you sound like a small child or a parrot, perhaps. So I like to vary it a little bit. But it's essentially to get at the why. So you've just done this redesign. Customers can't use it. You kind of want to write them off as maybe being dumb customers. And instead you say, well, can you walk me through what you were doing? Can you tell me why you didn't go on to the next screen? And maybe they look at you blankly and say there was no continue button. Or maybe they say, I was looking for the money-back guarantee and I didn't see it. But at any rate, you're going to get at those pieces of information because when you ask people to tell a story, they reveal more about what's going on. And you can actually see, I see their thought process. I don't understand why they went through this thought process, but clearly they're all doing it, so let's correct for that. and add a continue button or move it up or make it red, all the things that they tell designers that we hate all the time. Make it big. Yeah. So similarly, confirmation bias. And this is when we look for evidence to prove ourselves right. And we all like to do this, and unfortunately all of our social media platforms are just feeding right on into this and telling us, like, yes, all your beliefs are right, everyone around you agrees. And maybe some of you have seen this cartoon, which is kind of a classic. It's, I'm gonna go out there, I'm gonna research this. Oh, I see one piece of evidence, I'm right, okay, done, we're good. This is what we do. And if you ever worked on a team where someone is really set on making a particular decision, you will see this happen either consciously or subconsciously. So sometimes we're doing this to be jerks. Most of the time we're really not. We just honestly don't believe, we honestly don't remember the person who looked at our product and said, oh, I don't know, maybe someone would use it. And we're like, yes, they were excited. Like, no, they were being polite. But that's what our brain wants to do. It wants to look for evidence supporting us. So what do we do about this? And we are all prone to this. The people we are asking who use our stuff, and we, the people who are building stuff, what do we do about it? The first thing is when we talk to people, don't ask yes-no questions. And this is actually a really difficult habit to get in, but you will find yourself doing it and constructing far better questions to ask of people. So kind of the worst yes-no question is when people say something that starts with, don't you want? Where you could effectively just throw out whatever the person says, because it's not going to be valid. Because if someone's leaning across the table at me saying, don't you want? Sure, yeah, okay, whatever it was, I'm going to agree because you have made it so clear that it would make you happy if I agreed. And a lot of times there's not an immediate consequence to that. Sure, I'd love that feature. And that's why my washing machine has 16 buttons on it. And I don't know what any of them do, but I'm quite sure that someone approached a customer and said, would you like a setting for this? And they said, sure. I use 3 of them. I don't know what the other 13 do. And what it means is there's this extra cognitive load every single time where I have to stop and think about which button to press because there's a whole panel of them. And the 3-year-old wants to help, and I'm like, no, it's just too complicated for you. Although he's a digital native, so maybe I should just hand over the washing to him. He's probably got it down by now. He probably knows what the other 13 buttons are. But even the neutral ones, when we ask a yes-no question, people answer it, but they don't tell you that you are asking the wrong question. So if you really want to know about something that someone wants, and you say, would you do this? They'll say yes or no. But what you haven't asked is, what would you rather do instead? If it's raining out and someone says, would you like an umbrella to walk? Sure, I would like to have an umbrella to walk with, but what I would rather have is a bus pulling up right now or an Uber pulling up right now. That would be preferable. And obviously, if I'm going to give you money, you really ought to offer me a solution that I will offer you more money for in exchange. So you can say something like, tell me about how you're currently doing this. Not do you want to use this tool, but how is your team doing automation right now? And maybe you'll see that someone is going through a process that works incredibly well for them, and fine, they probably don't want your thing unless it's free. In this case, maybe we'll try it. But when someone says, oh, yeah, well, we go through this process, and then everyone checks their code in, and then everyone has to go around. You can kind of see the frustration in someone's voice, and you might say, this is somewhere where we have an opportunity. I can ask some more questions. I see evidence that someone will want this thing. Along similar lines, you can prompt for the story of what life would be like if they had this already. And this is my favorite thing to do with, if any of you work at companies that use user voice or any of those places where people can vote for features that they want, or if you have the kinds of customers who, when it's time for a contract renewal, come in with their list of features that they want, I like to look at them and I very earnestly say, okay, that's great. Could you tell me if we already had that, how would it make your life better? What would it allow you to do? And I have been surprised by the number of times I get a blank stare in return. Well, it would just be nice to have. And that's great if you're building something for yourself. If you're building something that you're going to have to support and bug fix on, no, drop that off your list right now. Sometimes you'll also hear people say things like, but your competitors have it. And you say, okay, that's great. So if you were using this with Google, how would it make your life better? And then again, they kind of trail off. It'd be nice to have. You can cross those things off your backlog. Oh my gosh, you just like took 10 things off right there, because I guarantee you that a lot of the feature requests you get, people cannot actually answer this question. And they don't need to understand from a technical level what it will enable. It can just be like, we were spending a ton of engineering time on this, and if we had this feature, I bet it would be cut in half. Okay, that's interesting. And then that's another thing you could validate. Would it really? You could say, we're spending a ton of money on this, and this would save us. We can't send out automated campaigns. Okay, your life would be better, and now I can make the decision, is it my place to make your life better, or is it, a competitor or a supplementary product? But you get much farther down the path when you go for this, tell me a story. How would this make your life better? This is also a good parenting tip once your kids reach a certain age and they ask for stuff, and you can ask how it would make their life better. And sometimes I get really good answers, and sometimes I just get a shrug, and then they kind of go, okay, I don't really need it. I think they're just saving it up for like a really big ask later, though. The other thing that binds us is anchoring. And so this is otherwise known as, don't show your demo first. If you want to know if someone wants something, as soon as you have shown them a product, a prototype, a demo, all of their feedback is going to be anchored around this thing that they saw. I'll flip back to the definition. So the first piece of information that we see unduly biases us. And this doesn't even have to be related. If I tell you the number 13 now, and then I came back to you at the end of today and held up, 2 bottles of wine and asked you how much you thought they would be worth, you would be more likely to pick a figure close to 13 than people who hadn't heard that number. They've done these things with digits of phone numbers, social security numbers. Being primed with a number makes you kind of gravitate towards that number for a short period of time. This also means if you show people like A or B, A is often going to win out, even if it's not better, because we anchor on something. This also means that if you've ever told your manager that something will take you 6 weeks to complete, you could discover that the earth has opened up a rift. And when you come back and say, now it's going to take 12 weeks, they're like, but you said 6. Demons have just flown out of a rift in the earth, like there's new information in play, and they're like, 6, you said 6 earlier, which is a good argument for never estimating anything, ever. Try that and see if it works. So, so don't show your product first. Instead, I like to abstract up a level and ask people about a general area. This is also really useful if someone is talking to you and they don't really know what you or your product does, and so they think they're interested and they're not. A few years ago, I worked for a web analytics company, and lots of companies came to us thinking that they were interested. And instead of asking, what do you use for web analytics, and at which time the answer would have been Google Analytics, and basically nothing else, or Omniture, I said, how do you measure how your business is going? How do you measure the health of your business? And I got an amazing array of answers from people who had in-house solutions, Google Analytics, Omniture, to people who said things like, I count the number of customers who come in the door. We did some usability testing once. And I could, very politely say, like, okay, great. You're probably not our customer right now. It saved me a lot of time, just kind of Xing all those people off the list. But it also means that you don't get hung up on a particular solution, and you don't get a tunnel vision into what the solution is. You think about something like grocery delivery or Uber, and the experience is not just the food showing up at your door or getting in the car. It's the thinking about it. It's the knowing how long it's going to take for your car to arrive. It's the knowing that you don't have to pay or shuffle around for change when you get out. It's that entire experience. And in my case, knowing that it will be easy to expense when I get back to the States, all of that is part of what makes it a competitive advantage. It's not just that the cars are cheaper. That tends to be what people focus on. So by asking that more abstracted question, you prevent people from anchoring on that one piece. What product management software do you use? Trello. Okay, now all of their answers are going to be very Trello-centric, and they're going to forget about the sticky notes and the whiteboards and everything else. So ask wider. But when you do that, you're still going to run into something called choice supportive bias, which basically means the stuff that we're already doing we will defend to the death because we're already doing it. And what kind of idiot would be doing a thing that was bad? This is also known as the IKEA effect, which a reference I have to bring up given the country, which is that we value things that we do more. People value that bookshelf that they put together. But it also means that if you are trying to work with someone who is doing something inefficiently, they don't necessarily notice that it is a bad choice. They don't notice that I could be spending much less time on this. I could be reducing my risk much more. And if you've ever talked to people on either side of the CI/CD line, you'll see a lot of that. You'll see a lot of people doing manual deployments who defend it to the death because you're like, but there's all these eyes looking at it. It must be better. And then, a year later, like, oh my God, what were we thinking? But you run into this all the time. It's very rational, even though it's not. It's the way our brains work. So to get around this, you can ask procedural questions. You don't say, does your deployment process suck? Because people will say yes or no, and neither will be helpful. But you can ask things like, how long does this take? Walk me through the steps you go through. How many people get involved? When something goes wrong, what does it take to recover? The last time this happened, what was the outcome? And when you do this, and you ask enough of these, you will start getting people saying, wow, this is kind of crappy, isn't it? You're right, like, we need to change this. I've had people go through processes and halfway through be like, I'm sorry, this is really embarrassing. I never really thought about it before, but I can't believe we do this. And that is what those of us who are building tools are looking for. We're looking for that opportunity to make people's lives better. So those procedural questions kind of free people from that sense of defending it because they're giving you factual answers now. It's not opinion. Opinion is where that defensiveness kicks in. We tend to be good with facts. The other one is to put people in the role of the teacher. And if those of you are, I'm forgetting it. Oh, well, go back to that. If you ask people about, say, their dev setup, what was it like? How was it like when you set up your machine? Oh, it's fine. Okay, let's say you have a new person joining the team. What advice would you give them so that they could be productive right away? And I've seen people talk about software go from, oh, it's fine, to, oh, okay. Well, I tell them, don't install this, unclick that, upgrade that immediately, turn off that mode, go through this, but not this example. Because we don't think about it. It's not new to us anymore. It's something that is familiar, but when we put people in that sense of advice, suddenly they want to be helpful and they remember the things that they went through and they want to prevent other people from doing it. So this, if you have a particularly polite customer, on a global basis, some countries are more polite than others, so getting feedback can be tougher in some places. Sometimes individuals as well. That's a good way to kind of reach beyond it and say, like, okay, let's say you were going to recommend this to someone. Let's say you knew someone else who was going to use this tool. How would you advise them to get started? And that's where all these kind of problem statements will come out. The other thing we run into is something called projection bias. And the best possible example for this is that Netflix has shown that serious movies stay in people's queues for much, much longer because all of us want to think that we're the people who will watch Schindler's List or the red, white, blue movies, and yet on a Friday night when we are tired, we just want to watch The Fast and the Furious 8. And so people put these good movies in their queue because they think, I will be the person who does this. I will be this bigger person. And yet we're just not. And so you'll also see this with someone, for example, I'm sure many of you at this conference now are feeling inspired and you're like, I'm going to change my behaviors. I'm going to do something. I'm going to learn a new language. And if you signed up for, say, a class that was going to start a week from now or a quarter from now, you might find that you felt very differently then, because now you're in the mindset of, oh, like, we just got through the holidays, I can't bear to take on another thing. But when we ask people what they want in the future, we're essentially asking them to project out what their future self will want. And our future selves are often, we're just wrong a lot. So the best thing to do here is to ask about the past, not the future. And not the present either, because people invent the present as well. So I've talked to a bunch of teams about how many new technology tools that they tried out. And I got these very enthusiastic, like, oh yeah, my team is great. Like, we're constantly trying on new things. There's brown bags every week. And I was like, okay, I'm in San Francisco, but this still sounds a bit overhyped to me. And so I switched that to, okay, let's say in the last year, how many new technologies has someone on your team evaluated and maybe brought to the team in a brown bag or a stand-up? Okay, I can think of 2, well, maybe 3. Well, that's a big difference from weekly to 3. And I understand, it's great that culturally this is an environment where people felt like we can evaluate new tools, we're open to new ideas, but the actuality is that people, have other things on their mind, and we're not just constantly getting new versions of JavaScript and trying them out, maybe only semi-constantly. So by asking that, we get a more rich view. This is the one everyone's favorite one. Social desirability. So we say things that make us look good. We do this all the time because we're humans and we like to look good. And this is not just deliberate. Sometimes this is subconscious as well. We say things that we think that our audience will approve of. We say things that we think that you will like to hear. We say things that reflect our aspirational sense of the kind of person that we want to be. So you ask someone, how often do you go to the gym? And they say, every day. Because we're all the kinds of people who want to go to the gym every day. You ask people, how many books they read, 20, Ask people, do you ever drive over the speed limit? Never! Because we lie, and we don't always even realize we're lying. And with something like the gym example, that might actually be that this person made it to the gym once, every day of the week, once. And they've always wanted to be that person again. Life got in the way. But that matters. If we're thinking about something, when we're thinking about usage, we need to know where those numbers are. So the first thing is just we can't ask questions where there's this obvious right and wrong answer, because people are going to go to the right unless they're being contradictory, and then they'll go all the way to the wrong answer, and both are probably inaccurate. So you ask people, how much they drink. What answer you get will depend on your social context. So you ask it at a university, people might actually up the number a bit because they want to keep up with their flatmates. You say, in a workplace, people are going to amp it down quite a bit because they don't want their coworkers thinking they're a lush. But if we actually need to know the answer, then we've got a problem here. Maybe I'm a doctor. So I have, there's an anecdote in my book, that's my favorite, is a friend of mine works as a nurse practitioner in a free medical clinic in Oakland, California, which for those of you who are not familiar it's a low-income neighborhood. There are a lot of people coming in there using a lot of things. And the first tip she got was not to ask people if they had been using illegal drugs, because they would all lie. But they needed to know, because what medication they gave someone was dependent on having a decent sense for what was in this person's system. And so they said, what you need to do is ask, how many times this week have you smoked crack cocaine? And she said, and people would answer. She's like, the amazing part to me is people would be like, 4. She'd be like, okay. If she said, do you use drugs, they would have all been, as clean as moms in church on Sunday. But when you asked it with the presumption that a non-zero answer was okay, then people gave you an accurate non-zero answer. And some people would start, do you want to know everything that I did this week? And they'd start listing off all manner of substances. But framing the question that way actually, gives people permission. And I like to say there's a big difference between saying, do you speed, which sounds terrible, and saying something like, in the last month, how many times have you driven, say, more than 5K over the posted speed limit? Right, that sounds softer. That sounds like everyone does it. It sounds like, 5K is no big deal, so you don't even need to worry about those speeding. And when you ask a question like that, people will actually stop and think. And you ask about the past so they remember instead of inventing. And you can actually see people's eyes go one direction when they're inventing and one when they remember. And I don't remember which is which, but you can look it up. And they'll remember, oh yeah, there was that time I almost was late for kid pickup. And that other time no one was around. And yeah, maybe 6 times. And then you'll get an answer. And then now that they've given you that answer, they will feel comfortable enough to go deeper and ask other answers like, how many times did you drive more than 20K over the posted speed limit? And someone's likely to actually, again, give you an honest answer because you've made that framing. I also like to ask for something that's not possible. And, People who are developers building for developers don't have this problem quite as much. Those of us who are building tools for consumers have the issue that most of our customers have no idea what's actually possible. I've had many people ask for things in my career and finish with, and that's not possible. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm pretty sure that's 3 lines of code. You know, my engineers are going to be ecstatic when I come back and tell them how much of someone's day they can make by writing those 3 lines of code. I say, if you could wave a magic wand and change anything about how you do whatever the thing is, doesn't have to be possible, what would it be? And that tends to break people out of this sense of incremental improvements. You know, the apocryphal quote, Henry Ford, if I'd asked my customers what they wanted, they would have asked for a faster horse. No evidence he actually said that, incidentally, but that is the way customers tend to respond. Instead of saying, give me something with wheels and a windshield and eventually a hood so that I don't get rained upon, those things are infinitely better and, as it turns out, entirely possible to build. So asking for the impossible breaks people out of that sense of, you know, asking for this little tiny thing and asking for something big. It also means that sometimes you'll have people who've been complaining in one particular area, but when you ask this question, they say something completely different, because what they blurt out tends to be the thing that's really important to them. And I talked to someone who worked in one of those innovation centers where they send in the teams to learn, Agile or whatever the flavor of the month is. And he was complaining about particular tech tools, and he's going on. And when I asked this question, he said, I just wish that the teams that came in would talk to each other. It's like, all the teams that come in have terrible communication. Like, they should use Slack, or I don't care, but they never talk to each other. And that was apparently his biggest problem. And we could have, added backlogs, or he could have added some different language framework, but apparently that was what he spent most of his time doing. And it's not something that would have occurred to him, because the conversation started out being framed around, technology and tooling and very serious things. But most likely what that company should invest in is a little bit of employee training, or buy Slack, one of the two. So this gets a lot out of customers. But wait, we have all these same biases ourselves. So aren't we going to just hear what we want to hear? So we've asked all these marvelous questions, and people are going to tell us honest things, and we're going to promptly forget to write them down. Yes, you will. And I do that. I do this for a living. I've done this for a living for a long time, and I still do this, which is why you have to think through some other things. So the first is another bias for us, hindsight bias, which is otherwise known as I knew it all along. And this means that when you get to the end of a project or an idea, you just tend to assume that everything worked out just fine. We completely override the fact that we pivoted along the way, we made these massive mistakes, we made this massive scope cut. And where this bites us is when we go on to the next project, we make the same assumptions. Like, well, last time it took us 4 months, so this time it'll take us 4 months. And you're like, but all these things happened. The dragons came out of the earth here. It also means that the things that we learn, we tend to not remember as much. So what do we do about this? Write down our starting assumptions. This is the best way to make yourself realize that you are fallible. So I go into tons of research projects assuming that people will say a certain thing, feeling like I know it, really. Like, I've been working in San Francisco for a long time. I've worked with a gazillion developers. I feel like I know what they want. I go into an interview. I'm like, surely they're going to say this. And then they don't. And if I haven't written it down, I'm going to leave that call still feeling like I know what they want. But when I write down, like, I was pretty sure that they would ask for X and Y and Z, and then I get on the phone and they say X and Y and Z don't really matter that much, but Q is the thing. I like to see that of this is where I started and this is where I ended up, and it reminds me that I am still learning, and that even in a space that we think we know really, really well, we are still learning. The other thing is just work with a partner. And so we do a lot of pair interviewing in my company, and sometimes it's 2 PMs, sometimes, oftentimes when I'm on the call, it's a fairly technical PM and me, and we hear completely different things in that interview. And one, it's just practical because someone can take notes while you're asking questions, but also you hang up the phone with a customer and someone says, well, I think they're really going to use this. I'm like, where did you get that impression from? Because I'm looking at my notes, and I'm seeing that all the things we came in here believing, all the problems that we thought would be eating this person up, don't actually seem to be that big a deal. So I'm not sure how you got that. So just having that second person is incredibly helpful. They will also kick you under the table if you start asking leading questions, and that is also the best way to stop asking leading questions. The other thing is that working with a partner can often free up the case where, let's say, you've been working with someone for a long time. There's stuff that you feel like maybe you should have asked already, and you don't really know. And there comes a point where it feels too late to ask certain questions. We've been working with this client for 5 years. Like, we should know what their biggest priorities are. It would be kind of embarrassing to ask now. This is where you borrow the new person. And if you have a new hire, I recommend using them. If not, I literally recommend borrowing someone this client has never seen before and bringing them along to the meeting so they can come in and say, "Hi, I'm Cindy. I'm new to the team. I just had some questions. These may be silly, but it would be really helpful if I could just get these foundational questions." And you ask basic things, and the client will give answers. And meanwhile, everyone else in the room is like scribbling notes frantically. "I had no idea they cared about this. Like, when did they stop? When did they stop having a limit on this?" So there's incredible value to just having that beginner's mind. And sometimes you need to literally bring in a beginner person to enforce that. But, the world keeps changing, technology keeps changing, customers' expectations keep changing. And so we can't assume that we knew things even if we knew them 6 months ago or 12 months ago. In my last company, we ran a ton of A/B tests. And people would cite A/B tests from 2 years ago, and we're like, we can't assume that something that was true 2 years ago is true now. And there are massive changes in how much our customers have started adopting technology and have gotten used to things like A/B tests where they see a different version. We just can't hold these things to be true anymore. So having that partner can also help. And I found that on my team, having turnover, and so I'd have new researchers, and they would say, "How old is that research?" And it was a really useful kick to be like, "You're right, we should reevaluate that." And finally, just share what you learn regularly. And even with yourself, this is useful, and it feels silly to do it with yourself, but it's incredibly valuable. And there's a template that I use to summarize back to my team, and that I recommend people use pretty frequently, which is basically to start out by saying, like, "Hey, here's where I started, here's what I learned, here's where I was right and wrong, and here's what I'm going to do about it next." And if you keep doing that and make these really concise, I'm very big on no more than 5 bullet points for each one, and honestly 5 for each one is probably too much. But this gives people kind of a good summary of that, where we started to where we ended up, and can make it clear that there's still more things to be learned. So you do something like this, for me, there's been several things where I've tried to get better at certain skills, and just, like a year went by and I didn't increase my reading anymore, or a year went by and I never started practicing my Chinese. And if I actually evaluate, like, what does it mean to do, like, what do I need to do in order to get better at things, and you experiment, you figure out what that thing is. And last year, one of my goals was to run more, and so I tried doing, like, having weekly goals. I tried doing weeks where I'd just run a lot, and I finally happened upon, by actually seeing what things worked, is now I run a mile every day, no matter what. And it's really useful. Sometimes I run more, sometimes I run way more. But it's just it's a non-negotiable thing. And now I realize, like, that's the kind of thing that works for me as a personal habit, is just to have, like, non-negotiable things. Because as soon as I have to, like, think through, like, well, I've already been to the gym 3 times, so surely I can skip today, that's where it all goes downhill. And so for me, habit adoption is that, like, just do it, binary kind of thing. But it varies for everyone. So all of these are good ways to get past the things that are blocking you and to get a little bit more of a sense of what people want, even though it's not what they say they want. So thank you all. And my email address is here. If you have any questions, please send them to me. I really do answer them. Also, if you'd like the slides, send me an email. I also work at Microsoft. I help us build better developer tools. And based on being at the booth the last couple of days, most of you don't use our stuff, and that's okay, because we still need to make them better. So if any of you are willing to help me with that, There's a very short survey right there where I am always looking for participants for research interviews. You'll get to see me put all these things into practice and also get to spend some time talking or venting about your favorite or not so favorite dev tools. So thank you all very much.